Hello, everybody, and welcome to the MIT Museum. My name is Michael John Gorman. I'm the director of the museum, and it's really a great thrill to welcome you to an evening exploring how dreams control us and how we control our dreams. We have three really interesting speakers. We have for the creators, two of the creators of this remarkable artwork, new artwork, which you may have seen in the room behind us, which is entitled Hotel Room Number 2, Communal Dreams, created by Carsten Höller, together with Adam Haar, both of whom are joining us this evening, in collaboration with Seth Riskin, who is in India tonight, and Seth is runs the MIT Museum Studio and has also been collaborating on creating this really interesting work, which we're going to hear a lot about during the conversation. But just to mention that this is a work which invites people to share a dream experience with two other people. So Carsten Höller is somebody who is probably no stranger to anybody here. He's an artist who has long been, really comes originally from the world of science, from entomology, from the world of insects, and has then really brought art and science together in extraordinary ways. And this is really the result of a long collaborative research project, the work that we have currently in the museum. Adam Haar is the founder of Dust, and is a former someone who's no stranger to MIT, having been at the MIT Media Lab for a number of years, and has also been initiated the symposium, which will take place over the next 2 days here at MIT in the Media Lab, which is unfortunately completely sold out, so we don't have places yet, but all of the talks in the Dream Symposium will be recorded and made available online. And there will also be opportunities to sleep in hotel room number 2. These will be advertised on our website, so keep an eye on the MIT Museum website if you're interested in a nap or a longer sleep experience there. So Adam and Carsten will be in conversation together, moderated by a neurobiology researcher from Harvard, who is also an MIT alum, who is Kathleen Esfahany, who is working in neurobiology at Harvard and has also been very involved in dream research. So I'm sure we're all very curious to learn about how our dreams may be manipulated and how art and science come together in this work. So I'd like to welcome Kathleen, Adam, and Carsten to the stage and to take us on a voyage through the dream world. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I don't know if all of you got to see the space right behind where we're sitting, but there is a set of 3 tubes, and they're connected in the middle. You can see each other if you are laying in them. And so it creates this amazing opportunity to have a collective sleep or dream experience. And I had the privilege of doing 2 naps this week, and I had a really interesting set of dreams when I was in there. So above you, when you're laying down, there is a metal tube with a bunch of slats, and there's red lights that move along. And so as I fell asleep, and we call the sleep onset period hypnagogia, I had these hypnagogic hallucinations, these vivid sets of imagery, these very special kinds of dreams that happen at the sleep onset period. And some of those dreams involved the movement that I think my mind created because of the movement of the red lights. Some of them actually then, as I moved into deeper sleep, became this very lovely dream of a river flowing where the light coming off the river was red, and that the riverbed had these red rubies on the bottom. And it was such a joy to have that experience and to try this, because a lot of our past work is looking at that sleep onset period and how these external cues can actually go into your sleeping brain. And I think that's a really amazing space to explore with your work. And I'd love to hear about how you two first came together with this idea.
Hello. Yes. How did we have a plan? We have a much bigger plan than what you see here. Should I talk about the big plan? Okay. So we started with the first work that we did together, which is called Dream Hotel Room Number 1. And actually also for this work, the title is Dream Hotel Room. We always forget what the dream at the beginning, but that's the official title. And that's important because we have an idea that we discussed quite quickly after we met, which is that we would like to put something together which is vaguely maybe like a circus, like an installation of sorts that moves from city to city. And in this case, it should be 7 hotel rooms, all specifically designed to make you dream in a special way. Everything from, dreaming about flying with flying flyer agaric mushrooms, to here collective dreaming, to maybe nightmares and other forms of dreaming, so that you can book one of these rooms in this traveling hotel, and you can experience very specific dreams and sleep experiences during the night. That's the big plan. So we are working on this. We have to be a little bit persistent because it's a very big project. And we started with the hotel, how you can see it here, the Dream Hotel Room Number 1, which you see there, which we can speak about after this. And this is the second iteration, Dream Hotel Room Number 2, where the idea is that we would like to create a setup where you can dream collectively, that you can dream the same dream, or at least that you can dream together with other people in close proximity from head to head. So the distance is, like between Adam and me right now, more or less. So how does that work? We don't know, because it's an experiment. We set it up. It's here to be tested, and we will see what comes out of it.
Yeah, nice. I think for me, for some of the people in the room, some of the signals on this bed will be familiar. So you're lying down, and red light is coming overhead. And red light we choose because of the lucid dreaming research that has used red light. And so, I see Ken, and I see Daniel, and I see Deirdre, and I see Robert, and I see a lot of people who have been really foundational to this field. And we chose red light because they chose red light. This is really coming out of existing sleep and dream research. And then when you think about, what frequencies are you going to be choosing for that light to pass over your head? Then you're thinking, oh no. Then you're thinking about, thank you. No, because we thought it would be fun to do live one. EEG, sleep stages. Then you're thinking about the different kinds of brainwaves that are prevalent in different sleep stages. And you think about some of the rhythms that are really typical for people to fall asleep to. You think about rocking a baby. And you think about, maybe this movement at 1 hertz is going to stimulate a certain kind of brainwave at 1 hertz, which might help a baby fall asleep. And so we're choosing the rhythm of the movement that's above you. We're choosing the color of the light based on papers which are existing out there in the dream research field. And I think for me, just the question of sort of how we started was, when you bring people in to run a sleep experiment, and I think half the people here are dreamer sleep scientists, they wake up and they say, that was the most beautiful, that was the weirdest, that was the strangest, I can't believe, I had this lucid dream and I could control and I could fly. And then you have to squeeze that whole experience into a paper. And I find that experience really difficult. And it seems like you're losing so much of the experience, which is really kind of an aesthetic experience and a personal experience. And so the idea here was to work with somebody like Carsten, who knows the sciences and knows the arts, to say, no, we're going to really lean into the experience of the dream using some of the tools that we have from sleep science, and maybe not lose the kind of wonder that people wake up with as much as a science paper sometimes can.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think I'm most curious about the interest in collective dreaming, because that's, I think, a space within the dreaming science that is less explored. And my second nap, I actually had a friend in one of the other tubes, and to the end of shared dreaming, it's so rare to wake up and immediately get to report your dream to a friend. Sometimes you might text a friend or tell them later, but to have your friend right there, you both wake up from your nap and then share the dream was very special. And so even though we had different dreams, they had shared imagery. and indeed it felt like a shared dream. So how did you arrive on that? And is there any sort of science question you'd hope people can follow up on from the art that you've created with the collectivity?
So the science part I leave to Adam, because you said I was a scientist, but I did completely different stuff. I worked with insects and how they communicate via smells between different species, and that's also a long time ago. So now I'm an artist, and I'm still, obviously very interested in science, but I think, like what you said before, so at the beginning, art and science are actually very different things in terms of how, as an approach to understand the world. An artist really just, if I say it in a very simple way, tends to lean towards, the unknown and tries to see what happens if you expose your thoughts or your way of working to certain conditions and see what comes out of it. But it's not something that is meant to be representing the world in a way. In contrast to science, which is not as subjective as we all know, and is a completely different thing. So now I forgot the question. Sorry, yeah, the communal. Yes. So because we made this first hotel room that we also have to speak about, but the second one we said because we spoke about communal dreaming, or I prefer to call it like this different things, but collective dreaming. That you have this experience sometimes, rarely, that people dream the same thing. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. There's also some historic, very interesting stories that have been told of a city in southern Italy. There was a Greek city that then was devastated, but before it was destroyed by a tribe, it's about many hundred years ago, they all dreamt the same dream, namely that a goddess was soaring up, what's that called in English? It's called bile. Bile on the city center, and they all dreamt that every citizen of this little city dreamt it at the same night, and then they knew this was a warning of the gods. And then what happened was that the city got actually destroyed. So the idea before was that collective dreaming was the gods speaking to you and telling you there's something going to happen. Even this could be the gods telling you a wrong story in order to make you do something which then would be what the gods were hoping you that you would do. So it was a thing coming from an external force. In this case, the gods that were telling the people this is going to happen. So there's but then it's a very interesting idea because we have this common way of looking at the world that we think what we see here now in a state that we all awake, I think, is more or less the same. We experience the same thing. And then we drift into our dreams, and it's the opposite. We all do our completely personal stuff. But is that really so? Is that, this other reality that we experience while we dream? How can we meet in that reality? This is something I find so unexplored. There's so little that we know about how can we meet other people in our dreams, and if we share our dreams, because that happens sometimes that you dream of other people that you meet. It happens all the time. But that you do that at the same time, can we create a common space in our dreams where we meet?
Yeah. Oh, cool. I think the kind of fundamental question, I think where it starts for me, the curiosity about a shared dream is just how invisible we are to each other. Oh. How invisible we are to each other while we're awake in general, and how little we are able to share our interior worlds. But dreams as this kind of moment where we lie down next to each other. For me, it's the childhood sleepover, and you wake up and you turn over, and maybe someone had a nightmare, and the sounds from their nightmare were entering, their breath sounds were changing the dream of the person next to them, or maybe they were sleeping next to a train track and both of them woke up, and it changed both of their dreams a little bit, or they went to sleep after watching Terminator 2, and they both had Arnold in their dreams, or whatever it is. There's that moment where it's like, oh, we've entered each other in a strange way. There's this surface around us that we can't penetrate while we're awake, Even though, of course, the world penetrates all of us and we have shared internal worlds and we experience shared events, and there's some, actually, folks here who have worked on shared dreams. You know, for instance, after 9/11, changes in the intensity of dream images throughout the city of New York. There's ways in which we penetrate each other, but mostly we're so invisible. And so the kind of moment of sitting in a red-lit space and dreams being this canonical kind of aloneness when we're totally in our own worlds, and then waking up saying, oh, you had a red river of rocks and I was in a red boat, or you had a red river of rocks and I was under red fireworks. It penetrates a little bit across these layers which divide us. And I think also it's worth mentioning, just because we are heading into a big science symposium, a lot of the divisions are being penetrated by new experimental techniques. And so some folks here, and Karen Conkley, who's not here, had this paper recently where while somebody was asleep and in REM sleep, in a lucid dream, sounds were played like these sounds, 8 minus 6, like math problems. And then those people, since they're in a lucid dream and can control their eyes, could move their eyes back and forth the correct amount of times to answer this math question while they're completely asleep. Person's asleep in a lucid dream, realizes it's a dream. Math problem is played overhead. Math problem enters the dream. Then that person can look left, look right, look left, look right, the right amount of times to answer it. And suddenly, maybe for the first time in human history, someone in REM sleep is communicating with someone in the waking world. We have breached some sort of wall that has been there for a very long time. And at least for me, it's sort of as interesting as a philosophical or aesthetic or communal question as it is a scientific one. What did those two people just do who talked to each other across worlds? And so it's really rich. Yeah.
I'm realizing for us, the idea of the external world entering a dream is so normal. But for many of you, it could be new. And I just want, by a show of hands, anyone to raise their hand who has had part of their external world enter their dream. Maybe their alarm became part of their dream. Maybe they had a scent in the room become part of their dream. Okay, great. So you've all experienced it, even if it might be a new concept that you're hearing defined, this idea of incubation of an external cue becoming internal. One thing I found very compelling was that the red light and the sounds are constant. As you're falling asleep, they keep going. When you wake up, they keep going. And so you really stick with this topic, and you're able to really iterate and explore this topic in a way that if you just fell asleep by yourself with an experience, you might drift away from. And I was wondering if that was intentional or if throughout your iteration process this changed. And also more broadly, what did you change during your iteration process? I know you had a summer of testing with many participants. What did you learn from that?
I can just start on the sort of continued sound. I don't know if this is true for other dream researchers in the room, but I have found that if I am doing a dream incubation, so somebody is awake and maybe they're slipping into hypnagogy or N1 sleep, and there's, for instance, white noise playing in the room. After they've had that dream, I want to wake them up and get a dream report. If I stop that white noise, they come out of it. They sort of leave that dreamlike space where they were. And that dream report isn't going to be as rich. They might not even remember a dream. But keeping that sound going that was with them while they were dreaming kind of carries that dream world out into the waking world a little more. I've got no science to back that up. That is just gut feeling, having put a lot of people to sleep. If I leave that sound on, something about that world continues. If I cut that sound off, it breaks a little bit of where they were when they were dreaming, and they wake up with less of a rich report. That's just vibes, no science.
Yeah, but the main idea is also like very, very simple, because we just synchronize people by, they lay there, they have their eyes closed, then there's a red shadow, or like a shadow going over, not the red shadow, but the red light and the shadow going over their eyes. And, it's like basically like these, what they called mind machines, I believe, in the 70s, when you had little LED lights in front of your eyes blinking and creating visual hallucinations where you would see a lot of colors morphing into fields, very, spectacular phenomenon. I've also been using that in my work as, as an artist when I make installations with just big walls of light bulbs. Yeah, maybe exactly. We have this technique that I actually quite like, that we because we don't know what we're going to speak about, so we can just Google something. And this, there we are. So like light walls with a lot of light bulbs, very, very simple device really, but very effective. And they all blink at a frequency of 7.8 hertz. And that makes you see things that are not there, especially with closed eyes. We probably all notice when you go to a flickering light source, you see these color fields. But even with open eyes, and strangely enough, also acoustically, you start to hallucinate. And you start to hallucinate with other people. You start to hallucinate even with yourself, which is very interesting because you say things when you stand there. It's very powerful. It makes tuck, 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 the light like this. But then you say something. I say something to Ed, and then I hear myself saying it. It gets back into my system, and it sounds really, after a while, I start to hear things that I'm not sure if I said that, if you said that. It becomes a hallucination in the proper sense. So hallucinations and dreams, of course, are, brothers and sisters in a way. And by making it into a mild form here with like shadows and red lights going over you in the same way for all the 3 people who might be in this installation at the same time, then might also induce some form of synchronization where you're then, connecting your inner mental worlds, not just by, being physically very close, but also by having the same experience. So it's a very simple device. We don't know yet how good it works, but are we doing some research this time too? We are? Okay, so we will know.
And I will say, even in my nap with my friend, when we didn't have a shared dream, it was still an incredible experience to both physically be in the same place, having these shared images, these shared themes, and then coming back, waking up from our separate adventures. And I think if we had gone into another nap after sharing our dreams, we may have then converged on similar things. So that iterative process could be very interesting to explore as well. And are there any things you tried during that testing period that you found interesting that maybe you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think, so we were really focused on picking something quite simple. So, hey, we all sleep under these red lights. We get to fall into light sleep. We hope these red lights will penetrate our dreams, and we hope that people will wake up and say, that entered me in this way, that entered you in that way. We got actually so many dreams of movement, because when you lie down in the bed and the lights are spinning very slowly overhead, there's this strong hallucination that actually the lights are not spinning, but you're still, the lights are not spinning, but they are still, and you are in fact spinning underneath them. And that ended up in a lot of people's dreams, and that was a surprise. So we got a lot of dreams of people spinning or being on boats or rushing down tunnels or being in cars. And I also think that the red light passing, for many people, and for me also, brings up napping in the passenger seat of a car and going through a tunnel with the red lights coming by. Vroom, vroom, vroom. And so we got all these surprising movement dreams from people. And that was really fun because it's like, oh, we're both going somewhere in our sleep. Probably not going to the same place, but we're traveling together. And that was a really nice thing to wake up to also.
Personally, the movement I felt was that I was going deeper into the structure, as if I was meeting my friend. And that was also very nice.
Yeah. So you said testing, in the testing phase before. We didn't do a testing phase before because there was no time. The testing phase is now. So, we have it there to be tested. It's really, really a prototype of something that can be developed, hopefully, into something more efficient. But I think it's, I just had my first own sleeping experience in there. I fell asleep. I'm also have been traveling to come here, like a long journey. But it's amazing you fall asleep in a museum, as if it would be nothing. It's I also had the turning sensation, and there was a lot of red things going on in my head, and then I was gone. So we will see.
Yeah, and just to the experiment piece as well, I think it's pretty fun that the last hotel room that we made together, we did run participants through and did gather data from, and actually did publish a paper, thank you, Deirdre, in Deirdre's journal. We actually did publish a paper on it, which is pretty fun. It's sort of a sculpture, it's sort of an experiment, it's sort of both. What's the difference? Hard to say. Kind of a productive conversation, hopefully. Yeah, it's a science experiment if it's in a certain building. It's an art project if it's in another one.
It's true, it's true. So Carsten, did you have any dreams while you were napping?
I'm a very bad dreamer. I'm a good sleeper, but you know, I'm desperately. That's why I'm going to attend this conference. I want to learn how to recall my dreams.
Yes,
I've
yes.
been, you know, Adam has been helping me a lot already, but I'm still very bad at it. No, I don't. I just, you know, there's something very interesting. We had this discussion also before. Why do we forget our dreams? It's obviously an active process. It's not because, you know, they haven't been important. They have been very strong, as we all know. So you remember when we talked about this and I said to you that I think it's some kind of, you know, there's something with dreams and what we call reality when we are awake that doesn't really fit together, and that they have to go quite quickly, and that we find them even kind of repugnant from a wake perspective, that there's some kind of excrement that, you know, you need to get rid of, something that you don't really want to have because it's you know, even toxic in a way. So because it doesn't make you, if you would be able to recall your dreams very well, you would have a hard time when you're awake. I'm convinced of that. But how active is this forgetting process? I can only say in my case, you know, I'm not able to steer it really. I'm happy if I could learn it, but I'm fascinated by the fact that this goes that is such a powerful instrument, this instrument of forgetting, to get rid of them. So what happens if you really get more access to them? It's a dangerous thing too, because it's a very private thing. We are not even steering our dreams now with help of dream engineers like the person sitting next to me and many others in the room. We might have more access, but we have to be very careful with this. This is it's a big thing.
I mean, I really love the idea that there's certain information which we can't integrate into a cohesive sense of self or world, and so we have to expel it. And, you know, Piaget wrote about it, but, I mean, I will say that there's some people in the room who I'm looking at right now who are sort of leaders in the field of sleep and memory, and I'm pretty curious, like, I don't know if we can pass it to you right now, but, like, Ken, I'm curious if you think that we purposefully forget our dreams because they just don't work with the way the world functions. And then I also wanted to bring up that it can't quite be that simple because there's something that's part of the waking up process itself that makes you forget. And I think that because there's some work on targeted forgetting, meaning bringing up a concept for somebody by activating it while they're sleeping, and then waking them up. And that waking up process, specifically ablating the thing that was before. But that means that the forgetting isn't tied to the content of the concept, it's tied to the process of waking up. Because that content that you reactivate isn't the kind of excrement, it's whatever you brought up in the lab. So it has to be more complicated. But Ken, can I ask you to kind of shout, or I can give you a mic. Oh, nice. I'm totally curious. Purposeful forgetting of dreams because they just don't accord with the way the world works.
Happy to give you an answer, but let me say, plenty of dream researchers will disagree, and there isn't a consensus here.
Yeah.
But I will say that I think we use our sleep in part for organizing all the memories we acquire every day. And that process is kind of in conflict with encoding new memories. So we turn off the encoding of new memories and we turn on the processing of our existing memories to work through them, to figure out what's important, to figure out new connections. And all that work is valuable. And maybe, Carsten, remembering your dream isn't always as valuable as that. But, of course, there are other perspectives that say how the dreams can fit into it. So I'm not going along with the excrement idea. But that doesn't mean...
It's like, I have never read this anywhere, but it makes sense to me. It's, excrements are something like they're byproducts of the body, of the process of the metabolism of the body, process of living even, and they need to, you need to get rid of them. Aren't dreams, no, I know they're not, but don't they also have this quality? It's a provocative question.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been some dream researchers, some folks at Harvard with you, who have said that dreams are just a byproduct of sleep. I think that in some years in his career, maybe Alan Hobson would have said something like that.
I'm not even going to, my own input would be similar enough to Ken's, but I just wanted to mention that actually somebody did say that. It gets informally called the garbage disposal theory of dreams, that they didn't use the word excrement, but Francis Crick, the DNA inventor, along with a rather obscure psychologist, put out this theory that dreams were to get rid, that somehow by getting into the dream, that it made the memory more likely to go away, that it was bad for us to remember dreams. And this got published in a reasonably prominent publication because it was Francis Crick. And just about every psychologist I know responded hostilely with a lot of evidence about why this did not match any of the research literature. So it's a much reviled theory, but it was put out there by a very, very prominent major thinker in our world. So great minds run the same channels, even when possibly they're wrong.
Yeah, but may I add, Francis Crick, he was also like, when did he say this, like 30 years ago or 40 years ago? He said, in 10 years, we will know what consciousness is. We will decipher it completely. We will exactly understand the whole thing. And did we? No, we didn't. He was completely wrong. So he might be wrong with this too. I'm just saying this to be a little bit provocative. But I also say this to say that the nature of dreams is still such an enigma, and this is why this is such an interesting research topic, in my opinion. And even, making artworks like over there, or the one we made before, it's a very interesting thing. And artists have always been fascinated by dreams because they are, like, in some way, our biggest competitors because they're so much better than we are, because we have to use our conscious minds to make artworks. But if we could make it as a dreamer, that would be the ultimate for an artist.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh no, just that I really like the Andre Breton, the Surrealist Manifesto. That's the ultimate. The ultimate art is a world where dreams and reality are completely overlapping with one another, and this idea that everybody could be an artist if those worlds were indistinguishable, reality and dreams. I find really beautiful.
I found the back and forth fascinating, and I just wanted to chip in with a little bit of neuroscience, which is to say that we know that certain memories that you create might get overwritten and in a way forgotten as you update a rule or as you learn new information. And so I certainly think there's elements to sleep that involve forgetting, and maybe some of those could be facilitated by dreaming. We just don't know yet. There's so much more science to be done. But also, of course, much consolidation, much learning, so definitely a process of both.
Yeah, and a really interesting memory question, why we can't extract meaning from something while consolidating those things, why they have to be different processes is a really interesting memory question for whether you're awake or not. And Kathleen, I don't know if you want to talk about your research, but Kathleen is really interested in what's happening when we're not necessarily focusing on a task, how memory systems turn online, how these periods when we're distracted are part of that memory encoding process. So it might be worth you saying a little bit about SIA if you want.
Sure. Yeah, I'm very interested in how you go between these very internally generated worlds, like dreaming and like memory recall, where you're really creating your own conscious experience, to switching back into being externally engaged, like you guys are hopefully right now with listening to me. And when we talk about something like dream incubation, that switch is critical, right? Because you're getting some external information, and you have to be receptive to it in some way, and then it's going back into your own internally generated world and looking at that. And I'm doing this at a neuroscience PhD program. I'm doing this in animals. It's not something where I can get these amazing dream reports and ask questions like this. And that's part of why I find the art so fascinating. And we know, for example, that across different sleep stages, as the night goes on, you experience different levels of receptiveness to these stimuli. And so right now, I think most people have done naps in the structure. But I think an overnight would yield many interesting dream experiences because it would take you from these lighter stages of sleep to getting to experience these cues in some of the deeper stages and even get into REM, where we know that cues can lead to even more bizarre and immersive experiences. Yeah. So with your first piece, you had people do overnights. Were there any interesting takeaways there that you wanted to see a comparison to here? The first piece, for example, there was not the communal element. And so here there might be opportunity with an overnight to do that back and forth, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the overnight adds so much. I think for, maybe some folks in the audience who have gotten to sleep in here, for myself, you're a little bit in control the whole time. My experience sleeping in this bed, which will move on 6 hexapod robotic legs while you sleep, is a total loss of control. I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't know what that movement is going to do to me. REM sleep is a different sort of loss of agency than hypnagogic or early sleep. And you give yourself away to it. But the other sort of much simpler thing that makes the overnight really fun, either here in Basel or here in Cambridge, is you wake up and you're completely alone in the museum. You're sort of an experimental subject and no one's going to come back in for 6 hours. And I woke up, we happened to do it in a museum where there were these Picassos in the room next to me and this incredible artwork, and no one was in the museum with me, and it was completely dark. And, Night at the Museum was a big childhood movie for me, and I got to have it. Yeah, just the aloneness in a precious place also was really powerful as well.
Yeah.
But maybe, shall we just describe do we have a video of this one too? So it was so coming back to the circus, and this is the first dream hotel room that we made, which was technically quite a complicated thing. So it's a round bed on 6 legs, like I said, hexapod, and no, that's me. That's not, yeah. Okay.
No, it's not.
No, okay. Well, we have to imagine the rest. Then you could book this room also during the daytime, like here, for 45 minutes, but also for like a whole night, and that's created some very rewarding experiences. So what you would do is you would lay in the bed, and then there was a replica of a agaric mushroom hanging over your head on 3 strings. Yeah, you can see it there. And the mushroom was moving, like flying basically around you like this. And the idea was to see if it's possible to make you dream about flying, which is one of the most attractive dreams that many of us had, especially in their childhood. That's also an interesting thing. And then not just about flying, dreaming about flying, but also dreaming about, I have to speak slower, dreaming about flying with flying fly agarics. So the bed was moving very, very slowly. There was a voice telling you, dream of flying with flying fly agarics. Actually, it was Adam's voice. Different, we had it also in different languages. And then the mushroom was moving over your head, but it wasn't lit in the way that you saw before. It was lit with a stripe of red light. So the mushroom was only lit when it hit in a completely dark room, this stripe of red light. So it would appear suddenly, and the light was also moving a bit like a lighthouse back and forth, to the right, to the left. The light was behind your head. So you would see the mushroom popping up here and there and there and there, because it was flying around, and when it hit the light, you would see it before you fall asleep. And that also created that the shape of the mushroom was changing, because it was morphing into, depending on how it was hit by the light, it was morphing into different shapes. Sometimes you would even see 2 mushrooms at the same time. So it was quite an interesting thing to watch. You're laying in this bed. The bed is also moving very slowly together with the mushroom. The voice is telling you this. Then you fall asleep. Then the bed reads where you are in your sleep, and when you're coming into different dream stages, it kind of, it responds to you and tells you again to sleep, to dream about flying with flying fly agarics. But it's also moving in a way again, maybe a little bit more than before, to make you actually, to bring you into the state. And it was also an experiment. We made this like a live testing situation for people to see what happened. People could submit their dreams. Then we got a very, maybe you know better because you did the research, but we got a very positive response. Many people dreamt of some sort of flying and something mushroom related. Could also be flying mushrooms that were huge and trying to fly out of the window, and they're trying to pull them back in and like that. But since it was facultative, they could submit their dreams if they wanted to. There's a strong bias, of course, because, you know, people who submitted their dreams, they probably dreamt something like this, and the others didn't, like me, because I also fell asleep and I didn't dream anything as usual. Then, you know, so, but nevertheless, it resulted in a scientific paper that, to my knowledge, is the first time ever that an artwork in a proper museum context yields from visitor response such a strong publication.
Yeah, and I'll say just a little detail that I really liked was the way we set it up was people could sleep overnight, and then there was a voicemail they could call in the morning, and that voicemail would ask them about their dreams. It would record a voicemail, and then it would send that recording to me. And so for months afterwards, I got these a lot of German, a lot of Swiss German, a lot of French people, and I learned Fliegen mit Fliegenpilz, because of flying with flying mushrooms. Because of that, because I would get these little dream reports in my pocket every once in a while. But yeah, we got a lot of, we got some people flying with mushrooms, we got people floating over the Amazon River, we got people turning their shoulders into birds' wings, and this was also just because of the crowd. This was based largely off of Tori Nielsen's work and Claudia Picard-Deland's work on incubating flying dreams, which they've been working on over the past few years, and just cribbed a bunch of techniques and put them in a museum.
I'm sure a lot of you are wondering about how you can do this yourself, and I just want to mention one other amazing part of this exhibit before we move to Q&A, which is that because you're in a museum, if you're taking a nap, there's visitors coming by, and some of them are going to go, at least in my case, oh my God, someone's in there, and wake you up. And the nice thing about that is it gives you a chance to then capture that dream, because as we were alluding to, as the night goes on, you're forgetting a lot of those dreams. You only really remember the one that happens just before you wake up. And so I think this exhibit, even unintentionally, really allows people to capture those dreams because they're just going to experience the natural flows of the museum. But yeah, I'd love to turn it over to the audience and get some of your questions. Please raise your hand, and Ola will bring you the mic.
And thanks for listening, y'all, for your time tonight.
This was super interesting. Thank you. One of the things that I think is interesting about the difference between art and science is that in art, you can sort of explore more broadly with different interventions, shapes, colors, materials. Science, you tend to take a more structured exploration approach. And so it seems like for the second version of this installation, you've pulled interventions from the literature. I'm curious if you're thinking about broadening interventions and sort of along the artistic exploration route of kind of almost with dreamlike creativity about what ways can you intervene in a dream from the outside that wouldn't make its way into scientific research because it's not standardized or replicable.
You want to answer? It's just here, what I really like is what you also just said, is that you don't know, you know, you're in a museum, you don't know what happens. You just said before, you were sleeping in there, and they were like, suddenly you woke up and there were like 20 people, because there was like a group, looking through the, and seeing, you know, somebody in there. And that's an amazing thing. So, you know, you're exposing yourself to a very awkward situation, which is not programmed in any way, because it's completely depending on who's happening to be there. And this is something I find really fascinating in terms of art experience. I don't know if it's really answering your question, but we often come from this idea that we think like, oh, you know, I'm going to a museum, I'm seeing an artwork, I'm looking at it, and I contemplate it, and that's basically it. But there's all the others who are also there. And I'm pretending that they're not there, but that's impossible because they're very strong. As a human being, I respond very strongly to other human beings. So many of my works, also other works, take into consideration the fact that there are other visitors and that you can look at them and that they do things that they normally wouldn't maybe do. And you're also exposing yourself in some way. Here you have it also very pronounced because you're vulnerable. I cannot pronounce this word. Vulnerable If you're sleeping, you're laying there in the museum, and then the people looking at you, but it still works. You fall asleep. How is that possible? You know, it's really remarkable. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of a piece of your response is how I feel, which is that even if you say, oh, I'm only taking from the sciences, and I'm going to use red light because they used red light, if that feels sort of limited, you're not actually in control. You're not really in control in the sleep lab, and you're definitely not in control here. And it might be because somebody walks by and says something, but it also might be because somebody has a terrarium at home where they have a red lizard, and so those red lights are going to make them dream of their lizards. And so you're working with someone's whole life story when you're working with dreams. And so I think there's this kind of beautiful tension in the science that we're trying to do, which is you plant a seed when you try to incubate a dream. And when you get a dream report, you're getting the whole forest of someone's life, the whole garden of their existence, all the interconnections there. And so I think, like, your question, at least as I understand it, is a question about control. Oh, should we branch out to more interventions and stranger interventions? The little interventions they're getting strange, I think, strange enough things out, and we understand so little about the kind of input-output process already. I think it's really productive to work with small seeds so that you can have more of a sense of where that thing came from that emerges. Yeah, I think it's really, like, in the way there's sort of a limited color palette, you can understand what came out a little bit more.
Thank you.
I think we have one question here and one question in the back. Maybe we can get this one.
Hi, thanks for coming, an amazing talk. So, like the previous question, he mentioned that we could play with various interventions while sleeping. Have you explored the opposite, in where you have complete sensory deprivation, like those sensory deprivation tanks, and slowly introducing those interventions, or subtly introducing them and studying that phenomenon?
Well, I don't know if this gets at your question, but there's a whole strand of research which leaves people alone as they're falling asleep and then introduces sound stimulation later on in the night. And so you can do a practice like targeted memory reactivation, which some folks here work on. There's other practices around lucid dreaming where you leave people alone until quite late in their sleep cycle. And so a lot of practices, and from Wesley's work, a lot of practices don't necessarily mess with people right as they're falling asleep, but stimulate them later in the sleep cycle. It just depends on what you're interested in. You know, if you're interested in lucid dreaming, a lot of people historically have been interested in later on in the night when REM gets really dense. If you're interested maybe in creativity, a lot of people are interested in hypnagogy or N1 at the beginning of the night. So it kind of just depends what you're trying to get at, if that's your question.
Kind
Not
of.
be. Kind of is not, you know, what do you...
That was an interesting answer.
Thank you. I took a left.
I was more curious on just what kind of studies have been done on more controlled environments, I guess. Like for example, I'm drawing a blank on the art that you did with the moving bed and on the 6 pillars. I feel like there's like a lot of factors that also contribute more than just the mushroom floating above you. Maybe it's the temperature of the room or the texture of the fabric on that person's skin, right? But I was just wondering if you've ever considered, like, you know, doing studies in, I don't know, sleep in zero gravity, where it emulates complete loss of any physical simulation, and then introducing those little things, like maybe the floating mushroom.
No, I think it's a really interesting question. I guess I would have trouble imagining the environment where there was a total loss of sensory stimulation. You know, in the sense that, zero gravity would probably be pretty weird. And I would probably dream about being in zero gravity. Maybe, I don't know. But I think there definitely are some intersections between the people who are interested, for instance, in like the Ganzfeld research, which is old visual stimulus deprivation and the kind of hallucinations that people have when you deprive them of visual stimuli, and dream research. Just the idea, I think, that when you end up in an environment without sensory stimulation, you start producing senses because you're not getting senses as input. I think it's totally a dreamlike phenomenon, and there's lots of research on that. I don't know if someone in the audience knows better than me, but I don't know anybody who has studied dreaming in sensory deprivation tanks, but somebody should, and Carsten did put people in sensory deprivation tanks, so you might have some thoughts.
Yeah, but also like, because I'm not very scientific anymore, I'm taking some liberties. So I was more interested in the idea what happens if you put like a kind of something like a sort of deprivation tank, sensory deprivation tank, like, yes. So I built a big one actually, for up to 6 people can enter it simultaneously. And we had it in an exhibition in New York, for instance, at the New Museum, and I thought nobody would ever do this because this, I'm interested in this idea of exposure in museum and, strange forms of behavior. But actually people were queuing up to then go inside the structure. Actually, it was only 4 people. I said 6, I was wrong. 4 people. Undress, you have to be completely naked. You shouldn't even have a ring on your finger or something, nothing at all. And lay down and float in this not really sensory deprivation tank, but still floating tank, and see what happens. But it's more the awkwardness that I find really interesting. The fact that you're there. People outside the museum, visitors, they can't really see you because it's built in polypropylene and you can't look through. It's only translucent. So you see some kind of shadows floating there on the water. But the people inside, they have a remarkable experience because, they're floating there with other people, and it's definitely not sensory deprivation because the others are there. Like, again, it's very much about that. But then I have one at home also, a sensory deprivation tank, which I quite often use. And what you said before, Adam, to study dreaming in there, because I don't think because I always fall asleep in it in a way, but it's a very special sleep. It's not not even comparable to the sleep in here. It's a sleep that is almost, it has a very, I don't know if you ever used one, but it has a very specific quality to it, and it's somewhere, your thoughts are still there, but your body is gone, something like that. So interesting subject to study, in my opinion, absolutely.
I just remembered my favorite deprivation paper. I couldn't remember the name for a second. But it's this paper from, I think, like 1961. And it's stabilization of images on the retina. And so it's this sort of gruesome image. But what they did was they said, part of sensory stimulation is people's eyes are moving around the world at the same time. Stimulate, 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 stimulate. Saccades. Your eyes are moving. And they were curious if you stopped even that sensory stimulation, what it would do to the kind of meaning making we do in vision. And what they found was that images dissolved based on what they read as units of meaning. And so it wasn't like when you stop someone's eye from moving, the whole face faded, which is kind of what you would expect. Actually faded first, you lost the hair, then you lost the nose. You have someone look at this picture, their eyeball cannot move. Some fading is going to happen because the brain is not making sense of the world in the way it usually does. And then when you did letters, HB, it would first fade into an H, and then it would first fade into a B, and then maybe it became a 3, and then became a 4, and beer became peer, and peep, if this makes sense. The whole thing doesn't dissolve in unison, it dissolved by units of meaning, and what they took from this is the 60s. What they took from this in vision research is, every saccade is building up the world in units of meaning, not necessarily in units of pixels like you would build up the world with a camera. It was such an interesting paper. I don't know if anybody followed up on it, but I mostly remember it because that's a brutal picture. But so much is interesting to think about in deprivation and why we need to fill the world with experience when the world doesn't give us experience to fill us is a really beautiful question. Yeah.
Thank you.
We turned right.
Ola, do we have time for another question? The person in the back had their hand up first, so I'm going to send it there. I'll also just say while Ola's walking, there is a vast literature where people do target individual modalities during sleep. And then, of course, this art makes it multimodal and complicated, as you're saying. So plenty to read if you're interested.
Hi. So this is kind of a question that it's been talked around a little bit, but I was just wondering, it's kind of a two-pronged question. So there's many ways in which we can be prone to nightmares. CPTSD or PTSD causes nightmares. If you had mustard before you fell asleep, you might have a nightmare. So I'm just wondering, there's many factors that may cause us to have nightmares. So my two questions are, do you do anything to control for nightmares? Like, for example, screening people to see if they have PTSD or make sure they haven't eaten before they gone into the machine. And my second question is, have you had any results that have caused people, like have any of the people who have dreamed in your machine had nightmares? Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'll say the food thing is maybe a site of not very active debate, but debate if you bring it up. It's sort of interesting. I don't know if other people in the audience will correct me, but I don't think dream researchers, everyone says, oh, cheese or spicy foods. And the only study I know about dreaming and cheese is done by the British Cheese Board, who are a deeply biased group of researchers, and I don't trust them. And then, I was like, this is a crazy thing for you guys to study. You're trying to sell people cheese. I think it'd be really hard to control for nightmares. And I think it'd be pretty strange to say, oh, you have complex PTSD. You can't come to our exhibit. And I think that it's a really totally fair question. I don't think there's any reason somebody who has a challenge with nightmares at night would have more of a challenge here. And I think that some people in the room, you know, like Wesley, who research nightmares, would say that actually a nap is a much better idea if you want to dip into dream world and not expect a nightmare than a full night of sleep with stimulation. And so I don't think this is the most likely place you're going to have a nightmare, but I think it's a totally fair question. But the 30-minute nap is a really good bet, actually, for working with people who are struggling with nightmares as a starting point. I don't know if you want to comment on it, or I'll take a head nod.
I don't know if I would be able to get people with trauma nightmares to come in for that.
Yeah.
The people aspect. The being around people and being vulnerable could be the problem. I don't think I would be afraid that it would cause nightmares. I just don't know if they'd be willing to do that.
Totally. We take one more, Ola? One more? Okay. Anybody? Oh, Ken? Or Parth?
I'm going to ask a question for Carsten, so about the art side. So earlier you brought up that maybe sleep and dreaming is like the source of our creativity, and I think that's right. So even if you don't remember your dreams, it could be that the insight and the ideas you come are coming out of what you were dreaming about that you forgot. And so I wonder why artists like you don't take more advantage of that. Like I'm thinking back of the surrealist writers who in Paris, beginning of last century, had these things called a sleep seance or a dream seance, where they would intentionally have someone fall asleep and then maybe asleep and then extract some of their critical creative ideas right at that point. Do artists do that these days, or is that a reasonable thing to think about?
Yeah, absolutely. It is yeah, but it's also relating to the question of creativity, which is very much it's a very fashionable thing to speak about creativity. What is this exactly? Where does it come from? And that's certainly related to dreams too. But I find the word creativity very difficult, because it's not about being creative. Because if you want to be, I don't know, maybe I'm special. I don't think so, but in case, just mention it. If I want to be creative, I just have to sit down and do nothing. And then I just listen to what's happening, and I look out of the window, and then there's stuff coming up, because it's impossible to stop thinking. I've been really trying this stop thinking thing. I went to a remote place in West Africa for 6 weeks. Also happened to be COVID at the same time, so it was perfect. But I planned it for a long time beforehand. And then I tried to stop thinking. It's impossible. It just doesn't work. And the more you try it, the worse it gets. It gets louder and louder and louder and louder. So the creativity thing, and this is not the answer to your question, but the creativity thing for me is a selective process. It's about, you have been training yourself to be able to recognize what is, let's call it better, stuff and what is not so good, and how we can then make this into an artwork. But in order to get really far, dreams would be a much better way. I agree with you. So how can you do that? And that's why I want to learn, like I said it before, but I mean it seriously. I want to learn how to get access to my dreams. And I would actually, I would like to make drawings and see what happens. I want to see how much of this I can capture into a physical medium that is, then can also be translated into an artwork and also made accessible to other people. And we have also been talking about before, we had a lot of discussions already, as you can see, but one of them was also like the idea of how you could visualize people's dreams while they are happening. And there has been a little bit of, maybe already a lot, of research about this. That's an interesting topic too, because then it could be made, accessible, it could be visualized, it could be transformed into something. But art for me is not something visual. If I would make drawings, it's only because there's no other way. I prefer experiences as an art form.
Just a quick mention, because I know we're low on time, but if you're interested in more dream recall, there's a whole bunch of interesting herbs you can explore, or tinctures you can explore that are called onerogens. And so you might find some that are focused on lucid dreaming or dream recall, but there's a whole rabbit hole and world and subreddit, if that's your preference, to dive into with the onerogen word. And then also to plug one, if you're interested in the artists and why they dream or sleep in the ways they do, Deirdre wrote this book, but it's the first book that I read on the topic and is full of kind of wonderful examples of, oh, that's where that song, that's where that painting came from. And so there is kind of a history of that question if you're interested in diving deeper. And then the question of, ooh, do the dreams that we don't remember make us more creative? Is such a good one. It's such a rich one. And yeah, Karen has some dreams and creativity papers. We have some. Messy question. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Carsten and Adam. And I hope all of you get a chance to look at hotel room number 2 during your time here. It will be on view, I think, until August. So if you're busy today, come back later. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for taking time. We're here to hang.